Do you ever sit back and wonder what it must be like to be an ANC minister, where you constantly have to deal with the problems of today, and the problems never seem to get any less? I do wonder how any of them just stay in their job. And that may be why Cyril doesn't actually want to. But before we get on to the main news of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and just circulate the video around your friends to help push this message out. So let's get on to the first news story. And this is around the chartered flight that was carrying 153 Palestinian refugees that landed in OR Tambo. Now, Minister Ronald Lamo has said that the government is suspicious about the arrival. I mean, I've covered this quite a bit in previous videos, but apparently the claim now is that the refugees did not have the required documentation from the Border Management Authority. Now, according to Ronald Lamo, the flight itself may be part of a broader agenda to cleanse Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. Now, Lamo suggests that an internationally coordinated effort is sending Palestinians to multiple countries and not just South Africa. Now, this itself is important because you need to understand that the company responsible for sending these Palestinians out of Palestine is sending individuals, to numerous nations, including France, Germany, and the UK. Now, Lamo says that it's clearly orchestrated, but he says the South African government doesn't actually want any further flights of this nature until a full investigation is complete. Now, it's interesting that South Africa loves the Palestinians, but they say they don't want any further flights of them to come to the country. Now, the timing itself is suspicious because this is all happening right before the G20. And many have suggested that the whole reason that they were flown into South Africa in the first place is actually because of the G20. But that doesn't actually appear to be the case, because some of the individuals who had been interviewed said South Africa was picked, yes, picked, because apparently our values closely align to the Palestinian cause. In other words, we're pro-Palestinian. And apparently, because we were pro-Palestinian, we were more likely or more inclined to allow the individuals to assimilate into South African society. At least that's the suggestion now. It's amazing how the news evolved. We went from, we don't know why they're here, we don't know where they came from, we don't know who these people are, to, oh, look, they actually didn't know they were even coming to South Africa, and now they really want to be in South Africa because our values match theirs. Yeah, I can't make sense of it either. But South African aviation operators had received requests for a dozen similar flights dating back to August. So it just shows you actually how big the scale of this operation actually is. Now, we know this was the second flight. The first one actually went off without any hitches. But the latest flight was apparently arranged by a dubious Jerusalem-based humanitarian organization, which is apparently led by some kind of Israeli Arabs who are pushing individuals abroad, not because of the government mandate, but because they're getting paid to. They're a private company. They're apparently being paid by individuals who are trying to get out of Gaza and go to what they consider to be safe havens. The problem is that the actual individuals listed online don't seem to exist. So there is a lot of suspicion as to who's organizing it. Now, Lamo himself doesn't actually say it was Israel who organized the flight, and so there have been some suggestions that maybe Israel's pushing these individuals abroad. Well, he doesn't actually say that, but what he does say is that Israel has indirectly or maybe even directly created the conditions which have forced Palestinians out of Palestine. In other words, there's a war. And to that I would say, dude, October 7th was caused by Gazans. It was caused by Hamas. Israel didn't attack itself, regardless of what conspiracy nutjobs say that they did. I've seen the sites and the locations. Like, dude, this is undisputable. I've even interviewed the hostages. I know what's went on. So to suggest that somehow Israel's responsible for actions done against it is equivalent to a bully who's hitting you in your face with your own fist going, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. Like, this is stupid. Now, talking of stupid, there's now a new conspiracy inside the ANC. And apparently, the new conspiracy is that Cyril Ramaphosa is going to get pushed out of the ANC. Now, this all comes amidst the party leadership statements and media revelations, and Ramaphosa's own actions appear to indicate he's going to get chucked out. Now, a letter circulating amongst the Eastern Cape ANC leaders proposed removing Cyril Ramaphosa as the ANC president, disbanding the NEC entirely, and replacing it with a national task team led by the former President Thabo Mbeki. I could think of worse things to happen. It's not actually the worst thing that could happen to the Republic, I suppose. Now, the ANC's Veteran League president has condemned this as a covert and divisive attempt to destabilize the party. Now, the Veterans League says that Ramaphosa must finish his term, because you see, the ANC is starting to notice something that the rest of us are noticing too. No leader in the ANC is ever able to finish their term. Thabo Mbeki got chucked out, and then it went to Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma got chucked out. Now it's gone to Cyril, and Cyril gets chucked out. It's basically making the presidency of the ANC a poisonous chalice. Well, it's poisonous to the rest of us too, so I mean, welcome to the club. Now, this comes amid speculation that Cyril Ramaphosa may step down after the G20 Summit. And I've got to say, people are starting to speculate about that. It's like we mentioned that ages ago. We mentioned that insiders had told us that inside the ANC, Cyril had resigned around Palapala. Remember, he was going to submit his resignation, and he was convinced to stay on. And he said, according to insiders and suggestions, all allegations, I grant you that, but according to them, he said, well, I'll stay on for the big events, but once the big events like the G20 are over, I'm out of here. And would you know it, G20 is nearly over, and would you know it, he's already starting to suggest he's out of here. So this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody that watches Morning Shot. Now, many analysts are arguing that Ramaphosa still enjoys strong favorability amongst ANC supporters, and there's a reason for that. That is because an ANC without Ramaphosa is dead. Though I've got to say that an ANC with Ramaphosa is equally dead, so make of that whatever you will. Now, removing him would likely fracture the ANC further and create significant economic instability because it would effectively end the GNU. So what that would do to the economy in terms of, well, foreign investment, in terms of money flows, bond markets, all the usual stuff, well, it would cause a lot of uncertainty, which will probably lead to a large amount of capital flight. In any case, what it is going to do is it's going to cause unemployment, and that in itself will harm any form of ANC chances that the ANC might have for the 2026 municipal elections. Now, I'm still of the opinion that the ANC is going to get hiding during those elections. And if I was Ramaphosa, I would want to be around when the results come out. So for me, I'd probably want to leave rather than get forced out after the elections as being the guy responsible for the ANC wipeout. But that's just my opinion. Now, Ramaphosa addressed the NEC in a heated closed-door session, saying, and his exact stance was, give me a resignation date and I'll resign. Apparently, he dared opponents to stop plotting in dark corners like cowards. He says if the NEC formally asks him to step down, he'll resign immediately, even if it's tomorrow. He says he doesn't care. In the same speech, though, he did hit back at these NEC members and said that he was calling for lifestyle audits on them. And he warned the ANC cannot run mafia style. And to that, I'd say, Cyril, you guys have been running mafia style for pretty much your entire term, bud. Now, he denounces the secret of plotting and factionalism. And to that, again, I say, that's the way the ANC works. It's had secret plots and factionalism for the entire time Ramaphosa has been there. Do not forget that when he first came to power, there was the whole RET faction that was plotting to undermine him at every opportunity, that was going to be led by Dlamini Zuma, who was just around the corner, ooh, the boogeyman. So, yeah, we've heard this kind of rubbish before. Now, multiple outlets reported that apparently Cyril is now planning to resign after the G20, and his comments are intended to confront the rumors head-on, call the bluff of internal enemies, and position himself as a transparent and accountable leader. Though to that, I gotta say, it's not really working because we kind of knew what the plan was in the first place. Now, an ANC spokesperson insisted that there's no plan for Cyril Ramaphosa to step down. They said that the NEC does not have a departure lounge. In other words, they're not trying to get rid of Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, Ramaphosa is set to serve as president until the end of 2027, as he was elected in 2022. And all rumors originate from unnamed factions. There's always unnamed factions. What, the new RET, I suppose. The circulating letter is not official and has no mandate. So I suppose you could say that that means it's unofficial, but it's like official, unofficial. Now, the presidency spokesperson says that the entire palaver is an attempt to remove Cyril Ramaphosa and is there to destabilize the government. And he calls them coercive, divisive, and driven by dark forces. It's always dark forces with the ANC. So what do I personally think? I think there's probably a serious amount of truth in this, because we've known that this was the game plan all along. And as we get closer to the end of the G20, game plan is either going to materialize or it's not. And if the game plan, as has been suggested, is going to be the game plan, you're going to start seeing him moving down these lines, saying, make me resign, I'll leave after the G20. So it's not really surprising. I think that the letter is probably unofficial, but probably actually rather accurate. Now, moving on to another scenario around the G20, and this actually is that the US has formally notified G20 members that it will not support issuing a traditional G20's leaders declaration at the Johannesburg Summit. Instead, they will accept only a chair's statement. So what does this actually mean? Well, this leaders declaration is usually what they've all agreed. It's like, we've had a meeting, this is what we said, this is going to be the agenda, this is what we agreed. And the US has said, nope, not going to agree it, not going to do it. So this will be the first G20 summit since 2008 that's failed to produce a consensus declaration. And it's a dramatic blow to South Africa's global credibility whilst chairing the G20, because we're effectively going to sit, have a talking shop, going to agree nothing, and it's not going to be binding, which many individuals are saying, well, why is China not coming? Well, I suppose this is actually why. It's a giant waste of time, because it's going to have no credibility. Now, Donald Trump has announced that no US government official will attend the summit, and that in itself is unprecedented, but therein is the problem. Like, you can't even sign a slip and say, oh, they can't have agreed to it. Like, there's going to be no one there to agree to it. In any case, what we can take from all of this is that without US support, the G20 will be forced into a weaker, symbolic and non-binding outcome instead of a joint declaration. And for me personally, I think it's a good thing. I don't like these globalist, unelected bodies. They all want to tell us how we should live our lives, stop eating meat, like have national health service and whatever other rubbish. And it's not really what we want as citizens, but it's what the global elite tell us that we should have because they know better. And so the less credibility for these globalist type agendas, these globalist meetings, well, for me personally, the better. Now onto a very final news article. And this is the news article that 1.5% of the population in South Africa pays 60.6% of all personal income tax. Now, personal income tax is the biggest source of government revenue, accounting for 729.9 billion rand. And this in itself, this extreme concentration of those individuals who are paying personal income tax, is now a problem, because it makes South Africa itself vulnerable to economic shocks. And it further means that South Africa itself is incapable of raising taxes further without collapsing revenue. And it's entirely dependent on an affluent minority. And as you drive that minority into the sea, well, you lose your tax base. You've only got 1.5% of the population that you're taxing in the first place. The rest of them are just leeching. Now, to give you a breakdown of what that actually means, well, there's around 10 million taxpayers in South Africa. The middle group, earning between 250 and 750K a year, well, they're paying 35% of the revenue. That is the tax in South Africa. Now, the top earners, individuals earning more than 750K a year, account for 60.6% of revenue. Now, what this actually means is that South Africa has already moved past the Laffer curve, and that raising taxes will now reduce revenue, because those top earners will essentially just stop paying. They'll reduce their own wages, they'll pull themselves into the middle group, where they won't really have to pay much of the tax, or they'll immigrate. And so South Africa really has a problem, and it's a tax problem, because South Africa needs to raise taxes and it needs to raise more money. It doesn't have the money. And this is going to mean that key programs such as NHR, they're just impossible. Can't be done. Can't be done. And it's all due to the ANC's own making, because the ANC has stagnated the economy, but they always had these kind of socialist, wacky-backy type ideas that they were going to fund all these social programs with a tax base that they themselves have destroyed. Like, this is what happens when you're a communist with short-term thinking. Like, these people didn't think this through, and this is the consequence. In any case, that's just my views. These are just my opinions. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until tomorrow, bye.